If I were to ask you to name a town or city on the River Avon, you might well respond with Bristol, Salisbury, or Stratford upon Avon, for instance. There's just one problem. Those are three different rivers. Okay, not a mind-blowing revelation, but it does beg the question, what does Avon mean? Well, the good news is this topic's ripe for a spot of visual learning, since all three namesake rivers are dotted with almost exclusively handsome riverside towns, as the travel writers of old may say. So join me as we meander our way through this watery trio, town by town and city by city, and address the question, what's in a name? A bit of foreshadowing for starters right there. Oh, and I'll sprinkle in a few cryptic clues as to the answer along the way, and there may even be a twist ending. A twist for some at least. That's a clue of sorts right there. We'll take in the Georgian crescents of Bath, the engineering marvels of Bristol, and the UK's tallest cathedral. But first, let me take you to Rugby. Why Rugby? Because it's the most upstream town along the northernmost of our three Avons. Its source is a little under 15 miles east of here, in the Northamptonshire village of Naseby, where a great battle took place during the English Civil War. Rugby's main claim to fame is not hard to guess, and it all stems from 2 centuries ago when a schoolboy named William Webb Ellis was playing football and decided to pick up the ball and run with it. So the legend goes. Rugby's riverside could be mistaken for a sketchy abandoned canal, and flowing under a busy A road doesn't help in that regard. But don't worry, it's all downhill, or rather downstream, from here. As if to drive home that last point all the harder, the next town along our first River Avon is Warwick. In contrast to Rugby's struggles with modernisation, try as it might, pun intended, Warwick's illustrious county town demonstrates some of the finest architectural craftsmanship from over half a millennium ago. And not least at the riverside, guarded faithfully by Warwick Castle, evoking the kind of imagery normally reserved for fairy tales. At this point, by the way, the Avon has been fortified with extra water fed into it by a nearby tributary, the River Lem, which, as its name suggests, flows through Warwick's next-door neighbour, Leamington Spa. But we'll save the Spa treatment for later, as we stay on course and to a town immortalised by a certain bard, Stratford-upon-Avon. The wealth of timber-framed housing on show, both here and in upstream Warwick, seems almost unfair to the other counties of England. Old Shakespeare himself was born in one such, and educated in another, making this all the more alluring to the tourists who descend upon this town, which is better equipped to absorb them than some of the tiny villages of the Cotswolds to the south. As to our subject matter, well, smooth runs the water where the brook is deep and all that. To the point though, wherefore art this, the River Avon? Well, you'll know wherefore by the end of this video, but let's just say you can look to Henry V and VII for a clue. Anyway, the water in question here is soon to exit stage left out of Warwickshire and into Worcestershire, wherein the first town it finds is Evesham. The sharp meander formed by the Avon here became the site of Evesham Abbey in circa 701 AD, after the Bishop of Worcester declared it holy ground upon experiencing a vision of the Virgin Mary. On a darker note, these same waters may well have run red with blood during the Battle of Evesham in 1265, when Henry III's forces hemmed in the army of rebel Baron Simon de Montfort, who found himself enclosed here, with the only bridge having been blocked off. Around 4,000 of the rebel army are said to have been killed here, including de Montfort himself, and let's just say the details of his death are not pretty. But this isn't the only town on this river that's seen medieval bloodshed, as will soon become apparent. Our next town is a feast of cohesive Georgian splendour, Pershore. While its history may be a little quieter than that of its neighbour to the east, Pershore does boast an abbey of a similar age in origin, and one which remains the main focal point of the town to this day, having been repurposed as its parish church after the Reformation. The monks of Pershore Abbey were responsible for the construction of the stone bridge into town, although it was remodelled after incurring damage during the English Civil War, the damage in question being a botched slighting by Charles I's forces leading to 40 of his men drowning in the Avon. Chalk that one up as an own goal, I guess. From here, the river performs a few meanders before departing Worcestershire for another county that our cousins over the pond tend to have difficulty pronouncing. Gloucestershire, and a showcase of half-timbered excellence rivalling a few other towns already featured, this time courtesy of Tewkesbury. We have then a hat-trick of abbeys. Tewkesbury Abbey, built by the Normans, is said to feature the largest Romanesque crossing tower in Europe. Just as with Pershore, its role as parish church since the Reformation accounts for its intact state. It's also where a number of Lancastrians took refuge after being routed at the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471. Refuge, that is, until they were dragged out and executed. This was a key moment in the Wars of the Roses, with the House of York scoring a decisive victory, while the House of Lancaster lost around 2,000 men. Among the victors was one Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who would shortly afterwards deliver a monologue to an empty room about it being the winter of our discontent, at least according to the play. But it's fun to entertain the idea that all the kings of old really did speak with Shakespearean flourish. In any case, Tewkesbury contains a second link to the bard from Warwickshire, and that is, of course, the River Avon. In fact, it's in this town that it makes its confluence with the River Severn, which may become significant later. But for now, let's jump to our next River Avon. About 40 miles to the south is where you'll find its first town, Malmesbury. This time the source is situated near the Cotswold village of Badminton, another place to have a sport named after it, but that's by the way, as we're here to follow the waters that percolate through said Cotswolds and into this ancient market town. And by ancient, I mean England's oldest borough, so it's claimed. Malmesbury Abbey was founded in the 7th century and would later become the burial site of Athelstan, the first king of all England. The Normans rebuilt the abbey in the 12th century, and the adjacent market cross is said to have been constructed of stone from the spire which blew off in a storm. On to watery matters, and immediately setting the tone is an old watermill, since converted into flats, and thus establishing a theme, being that this river's past is less about bloody battles and more about fine textiles. A few meanders through the Wiltshire countryside take it southwards to our next town, Chippenham. Flowing through the very centre of town, these same waters once spun the wheels that fuelled the production of cloth, corn and other assorted industries. The wheels may have long since come to a standstill, but their role in shaping the town of today is reflected in the fine stone masonry of largely Georgian origin. Continuing south, the water finds another town shaped by its own flow by way of the wool trade, Melksham. Back in the Regency era, an attempt to pivot into a new industry was made here following the accidental discovery of 2 springs in a nearby site thought to contain coal. Melksham began developing into a spa town with visions of it rivalling a certain city looming downstream, but plans to that end fell through. From here, the River Avon's course veers westwards, just missing Trowbridge, though the latter would be transformed by a tributary, namely the River Biss, into what was once referred to as the Manchester of the West, in regard to its eminence in the wool trade at its peak. We shall, of course, do as the Avon does, and likewise swerve Trowbridge. And instead come to the second town to feature in this video bearing the river's name in its own, Bradford on Avon. There's much that can be said about this town's visual appeal, but in short, it provides the perfect illustrative case of Wiltshire's role in the Industrial Revolution. Having peaked in the Georgian era, the county struggled to source coal in volumes that could have powered steam mills, as per Yorkshire, Lancashire and the Midlands, which in its stead has left us with this fine array of stone architecture befitting of a Jane Austen period drama, a quality it shares with our very next destination, by the way. Not to mention a rare bit of genuine Anglo-Saxon architecture, courtesy of St Lawrence's Church. We leave Wiltshire, for now at least, as the river winds its way back into the fringe of the Cotswolds, this time on the Somerset end, before making a grand entrance into the fair city of Bath. When the Romans paved the Fosse Way between Lincoln and Exeter, they made a key discovery around the point where it meets the Avon, a hot spring adjacent to a Celtic shrine dedicated to the goddess Sulis. This does imply that the Fosse Way was a Celtic trackway all along, though that's still a point of debate nearly 2,000 years later. The ancient Britons will be credited with something at least before the end of this video, but the ones responsible for the predominant architecture of this city come UNESCO World Heritage Site were the Georgians. Giving Bath its full due in a whistle-stop such as this is impossible, so I may devote a future video to the city entirely. For now, we follow the course west, just skirting the town of Keynsham, before arriving in another city which needs little introduction, Bristol. With its vast maritime history, it'll come as no surprise that the city, in which every day is Speak Like a Pirate Day, owes much of its heritage to the River Avon, although it gets a little complicated since much of the water is actually part of a floating harbour built to combat the tidal nature of the Avon and preventing ships from getting stuck in the mud at low tide. Speaking of which, Isambard Kingdom Brunel's transatlantic marvel, the SS Great Britain, is one such vessel berthed at the floating harbour, whereas one of Brunel's other designs, the Clifton Suspension Bridge, spans the Avon, linking the city to a small village in Somerset. Again, it's a long story, also worth its own video at a later date, I'm sure. But remaining on topic, the river continues on to the descriptively named suburb of Avonmouth before feeding into the Severn estuary. We're getting close to the answer, but I'm not about to leak it just yet, because we have one major English river left to explore, and for that we must backtrack to Wiltshire, this time at its southeastern corner, by way of Amesbury. The source of this river is in the Vale of Pewsey, close to the namesake village of Pewsey through which it flows, but as towns go, this is its first, a town whose parish church was once a Benedictine priory, although its main claim to fame has to be its proximity to something much older still, Stonehenge. Could the river have been used by the Druids to transport the stone 5 millennia ago? Looks pretty navigable to me. Next we have two destinations for the price of one. Salisbury. Why two? Because the famous cathedral city is not as ancient as it appears, being that it dates back to the 13th century. Its predecessor, which we refer to today as Old Sarum, lies about 2 miles upstream. The original cathedral was forced to relocate following a dispute with the castle. The story goes that the bishop of Old Sarum shot an arrow, agreeing that wheresoever it lands would become the location of the new cathedral. The arrow struck a deer, who staggered on for a while before succumbing, on the grounds of what would of course become Salisbury Cathedral. That's the legend, anyway. Its proximity to the River Avon, which encircles more than half of the cathedral, would imply that a much more pragmatic approach was taken in reality, as opposed to the fate of a deer in the wrong place at the wrong time, but who can say for sure? Of course, the Avon did prove handy in transporting the stone for Salisbury Cathedral, so All the more fortunate that the bishop didn't aim his arrow in the direction of Andover, I guess. Continuing south, the river enters Hampshire along the western fringe of a national park with the oxymoronic name of New Forest, leading us to the town of Fordingbridge. With a name that's derived from a fording bridge over the Avon, you may assume this to be the video's most self-descriptive name, but you'd be mistaken. As to the river's role in the history of the town, it helped power watermills producing wool, corn and sailcloth. There's also the legend of a botched smuggling operation from the 18th century when its ringleader, the brilliantly named Captain Diamond, had his cargo of tea, rum and coffee from Guernsey intercepted here on its way to Salisbury, with a fierce battle ensuing. Flowing further south and effectively retracing the steps of Diamond brings us to Ringwood. Our second New Forest adjacent town comes with a dark tale from the history books. The year was 1685 and James Scott, 1st Duke of Monmouth, launched a rebellion against his uncle King James II. After landing in Lyme Regis, he unleashed his inner dragon and amassed an army via Axminster, Chard, Ilminster, Taunton. You know what? That deserves a video of its own at some point. Long story short though, after defeat in battle and an unsuccessful attempt to flee eastwards, the Duke of Monmouth was held in this very building before being transported to the Tower of London. Returning to the present topic, Ringwood's riverside would be pleasant, if not for the A31 cutting through it unceremoniously. The two diverge, however, with the latter leading to Bournemouth and Poole, and the Avon finding its final town, Christchurch. Historically speaking, we're still in Hampshire. In terms of any time after April 1974 though, we've crossed into Dorset. Confusing, perhaps, but one thing has remained as constant as daffodils in the spring, and that is the River Avon's confluence with the River Stour at the mouth of each, forming a natural harbour by the English Channel. As it happens, Stour is also a common river name, allegedly deriving from an Old English word for strong, although other theories exist. In truth, pinning down the exact name origin of rivers does require a little guesswork, since they've been referred to by name long before written records emerged. Duplication of names would have been of little concern due to the limited mobility of the Anglo-Saxons on a day-to-day level, hence several rivers called Stour and 3 rivers called Avon. Except there aren't 3 River Avons, there are many, and here's where I unleash my secret 4th river. There's a good chance you know exactly what's coming next, but if you've not guessed this video's twist via my trail of breadcrumbs, or should I say Welsh cake crumbs that I Darren Browned into this video, here's where the penny drops. Welcome to Wales, and to the industrial town of Port Talbot. Before the namesake Talbot family constructed a harbour here for the transportation of coal from the valleys in the 1830s, this was essentially a collection of villages, including one called Aberavon, meaning mouth of the River Avon in Welsh. In turn, the Welsh name for the river itself is Avon Avon, and there it is, River. Incidentally, a river well known to 2 members of Hollywood royalty, Anthony Hopkins from this very town, and Richard Burton from the upstream village of Pontrhydyfen. It seems there's something in the waters of the River. It remains to say, for completeness, there are a number of smaller River Avons located in Scotland and one in Devon, both of which corroborate the idea that the name origin is Brittonic, and moreover that the geographic locations of the 3 major Avons in England being in relative proximity to the Celtic heartland is no coincidence. Whether the tautological name arose as a form of tribute or as a misunderstanding in translation is open to debate. If the latter were true, I guess you could say our English map makers of old were sold down the river. Thanks for watching and have a great day.